Good morning. The reading this morning is from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, verses 27 to 32. Jesus is talking about adultery and about divorce. You have heard that it is said, "Do not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery.
I always seem to get the tough passages, don't I? Yeah, it seems to be the way it is. So, as Caleb has mentioned at the start of the service, we are continuing our series looking at the Sermon on the Mount, which is where Jesus lays out this logical progression of how he forms us into whole people that can live in his kingdom. And as Tobias so expertly tackled last week, one of the major blockers is anger and contempt. And so Jesus first deals with that. And I get the joy of tackling the other big one, which is lust. And I know that what I'm speaking about today affects most of us in the room. And I know this because there was a study done a few years ago, and it found that 7 out of 10 men and 7 out of 10 women struggle with lust. And what's more interesting is they looked at that inside and outside the church, and they found that 7 out of 10 men and women struggle with lust outside of the church, and 7 out of 10 women and men struggle with lust inside the church. And so I know I'm speaking to 70% of the room at least today. But I also know from experience of all my friends that I've gone deep with, and not one of them has not struggled with this, that I think that's a conservative number. Would you guys? I feel like that's the case. And so I think it's more than 70% of this room. I'm in that 70%. I'm one of the 7. And so what I'm coming to share today comes from many years of struggling and experience in this, as long as a lot of wisdom that has come from my mentors to help along the way. Okay? So the way I want to do this is I want to take a look at what is lust. I want to do that first. Then I want to take a look at what does it do to us in our bodies? And then I'm going to look at what is the alternative that Jesus is inviting us into today. So we'll flesh this more out in a second, but I just want to give us an initial definition of what lust is. And to do that, I turned to some of the greatest old thinkers of history. I turned to Martin Luther and to, of course, Augustine, because he's great. And to summarize them, they basically say lust is a desire that has become curved inward upon itself. It's interested in seeking self-satisfaction for its own sake, away from rightly ordered love. And so the problem is not desire itself, it's desire that's become detached from love and is seeking itself. It's detached from covenant. It's detached from willing the good of the other person. And the goal has shifted from loving to consuming. Okay? That's the general definition, but it actually, what I've realized over time is it looks different in men versus women. And so for men, which I think most often when we think of lust, it's for men, and rightly so, but men primarily connect visually. And that means that sexual desire or sexual lust works out by that kind of long look. Not the first one, but it's that prolonged look, you know? Or as Dallas Willard describes, where we undress people in our minds and in our imagination, and we imagine ourselves with them. This fantasizing, it's done in a way that degrades their humanity and also disregards their relationship status. That isn't on the cards in this moment. We're only caring about what we could get out of it. It is entirely about seeking sexual gratification without concern for emotional, relational, or moral consequences. And so this is where, for example, like the culmination of this is like consuming pornography or other media that the media love to put out. And what it does is it confirms and reinforces objectification and consumption. That's us men. Women, however, are slightly different. This is, again, we'll see parallels probably in both sections, but women, from what I've been told, because I'm not a woman, but they connect emotionally. And so that means lust for women means to fantasize with men, being with men, primarily for their own personal gratification. It means pursuing emotional or romantic interests and intimacy for the purposes of self-validation rather than genuine love. It means objectifying men in ways that reduce them to their social status, their wealth, their attractiveness, or what they're capable of. And the content that is usually consumed, unlike porn, which also does feature for women, but it matters less what it's happening visually as it does the fantasy world it creates that they can step into. And so that's why you have like those raunchy or smutty books that are the most common thing that women read, which would be the equivalent to porn. Anyone feeling called out? I feel called out. Now, I give this list because I want us to really grasp that this applies to all of us, okay? This is for all of us. So let's sit in that uncomfortableness. The next thing I want to take a look at, well, what does the Bible have to say about this? Particularly the Old Testament, because that would have been on the mind of Jesus as he is giving this Sermon on the Mount. And I always find the best place to start with when we're dealing with any matters of sin is, what does Genesis 3 have to say? The moment of the fall. And we see in this moment, they saw the fruit, they saw it looked good for eating, and it was pleasing to the eye. And so they took it and ate it. Notice here how there's like this perceived goodness that's being withheld from them. And this is so often true of lust. It's like there's this thing we want that's desirable that isn't quite ours, so we have to reach out and grab it, even if it's in our imagination. And what I find interesting about this story is Adam and Eve are desiring a good thing. They're desiring wisdom, but they want wisdom without God, and so they're trying to take it rather than being given it. And so the problem is not that the desire itself is evil, it's when we let that desire call the shots over and above what God says is good for us. So that's Genesis 3. The next one I want to look at is Job 31. Now, Job is a really interesting book because it's what we believe to be the oldest book of the Bible. And so what I'm about to read means, so this bit here where it says, I have made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a woman, means that this has been on the brain of biblical writers for a very, very long time. Right? And I love this. I will not make a covenant, I will make a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a woman, right? So Job here is recognizing that desire is not something that happens externally. It begins in the heart. It starts there. Notice how he doesn't say, I'm going to make a covenant to not commit adultery. He begins in the heart with his eyes. And what that shows us, what Job is showing us here, is that the issue starts way before the action. And he understands that simply the way we look at other people influences how we relate to them. And he recognizes that if he looks lustfully at someone, it always damages that relationship and it leads to disaster. And so therefore it shows us that lust captures the heart and it leads us away from God. No one probably exemplifies this as much as David and Bathsheba. Okay? So you have this moment where, this is in 2 Samuel 11, where David is standing on the roof of his palace, he's looking around and suddenly he goes, ooh, and he notices Bathsheba bathing. And he looks, and he keeps looking, and he keeps looking, and he dwells upon it, and he decides, you know what? I want that. That's mine. I want that now. But there's a problem. She's married. I'll just kill him off to seal the deal. Like, it is a broken moment, right? And what I think it shows is that this move shows that even though David is surrounded by God's abundance, more than we're ever going to have, he has allowed lust to make him unsatisfied with it. And as a result, he acts upon that dissatisfaction. And as I said, his downfall begins not with his first look, but it's the second, third, fourth look, the dwelling upon it. And what it means is the lust, as it grows, it begins to override his belief in faithfulness and justice and love of neighbour. It begins to call the shots. And what happens is lust says, I want this because it will satisfy me and I don't care about the consequences. Rather than how does my desire honour God and others. Final one, the final piece of scripture that I want to draw our attention to is Proverbs 6 verses 25 and 27, which says, do not lust in your heart after beauty or let her captivate you with her eyes. And what the issue this proverb is getting at is not that to recognizing beauty is a problem. It's the dwelling on it and letting that desire to have mastery upon your heart. And I love it in verse 27, it says, it's like putting hot coals in your lap and expecting not to get burned or damaged, right? It's foolish to think that. And the key idea here is if whatever we let our imagination be captured by, that is what directs our life. And so if it's goodness, that directs us. If it's lust, that will direct our whole life. And so if we look at all of these themes, all of these passages and trace a theme through it, we see that lust is the heart's attempt to possess what it desires apart from God. It is taking what we believe will satisfy us rather than allowing God to give what is good in his wisdom. I recognize this is really heavy. I just want to name that. I've got one more heavy thing as well as a happy thing, which is I want to look at, well, what effect does this have upon us? Particularly what's going on in our brain. I found this, for my journey in this, my spiritual director told me this and I found it deeply helpful to understand what's going on, so I want to pass it on. So what's going on in the brain when we seek lusting or destructive desires? Well, as with any desire that is fulfilled in your body, the body releases dopamine. Anyone? I imagine most of the room's heard of dopamine. Is that correct? Yeah. It's like to simplify it, it's like the pleasure molecule, right? What it does is it tells your brain, this is good, do more of that. That's brilliant. And so that applies to all of life. Right, so that could be consensual sex within a marriage that's good and whole, enjoying sitting in the sun with a cup of coffee, laughing with friends, completing a meaningful task at work. But what if the source of that pleasure is not good? Well, it's still pleasure, so dopamine is released, telling you, this is good, keep doing it. But actually, another molecule is released. It's called CREB. CREB. Right? And CREB is fascinating because over time, it reduces your sensitivity to dopamine. It starts to block it. And the result of that is that you no longer find pleasure in the thing that is destructive for you. Isn't that good? That actually God has made your body so that if you seek something destructive, the pleasure of it is taken away so it's no longer as attractive. Right? That's amazing, I think. So CREB is like the brakes saying, hang on a second, this thing that you're pursuing is not right here. It's not good for you. But there is a catch with CREB. It is like using a grenade to kill a mosquito in your house. Okay? You will kill the mosquito, but there's going to be a lot of collateral damage as well. And the reason for that is CREB suppresses dopamine generally, across the board, which not specifically. So it can't just go, oh, I'm going to take away the pleasure of, say, watching porn and leave the rest of the pleasure of life untouched. It blanket does it. So that means, yes, you don't have pleasure for that, but it also means you don't have the joy of proper sex with your spouse, or that sunshine, that coffee, or anything. You're left with no joy in your life, and you feel numb inside. That's the only feeling that's left. I want to share this now because I feel like some of us may go through life not realizing that we're engaging in destructive desires, but I think we all recognize if we're numb, That was my experience for at least 10 years of my life. Numb to the world, numb to myself. But as I began to tackle this with a lot of struggle, a lot of support, it takes about a year or so, but as the creb wears off, you begin to feel joy again and happiness in all aspects of life. And it's honestly like coming alive again. It's amazing. So how do we actually deal with this major issue is the big question. Do we simply create another rule? Don't look too long, don't think too much, don't desire, right? And we'll just call that the faithfulness and the holiness. I think if we did that, though, we would be missing Jesus' point completely. He seems to be laying out this pattern where he says, I'm not interested in creating more rule keepers. He's interested in forming us into new whole people in the heart. That is what he is interested in doing. And so this is why attempts to manage lust purely through external control never really work. Not that people haven't tried. For example, we've had groups of monks who would go out into the desert and create monasteries where no women are allowed because, well, clearly if I never see a woman, I can't lust after them, right? That was the logic in their brain. Or on the flip side, there have been people who have said, well, actually, if I just hate the other gender, if I despise them, then when I see them, I won't feel lust, I'll just feel disgust, right? You can tell that's not a good solution, But what both of these things show is that you can avoid the issues, but it doesn't actually. You can still have a wicked heart. Hi, my boy. I love you. Yeah, and so this is why Jesus speaks so strongly about the hand being chopped off and gouging out your eye. He's not encouraging self-harm or offering a new legal system. What he's doing is he's taking the Pharisees' logic to its natural, foolish conclusion, which is you can be a mutilated human and still have a wicked heart. Because the question is not, did I act or not? The question is if I was given the opportunity, would I do it if I could? So instead of, did I act or not, the question for us should become, how do I become the person who naturally desires rightly? I'll just hand it away. Here we go. I know. I'm sorry, buddy. It's hard. Anyway, where does this all come from in our minds, though, in our bodies? At the center of human life is a desire for intimacy. This is where it comes from. We are made for connection with God and with one another. And that longing is not a problem, it is what it means to be human. So to deny that is actually destructive to us. But that desire for intimacy becomes distorted when we try and meet it apart from the way God has intended. See, sex in its proper place is one of God's good gifts. It's not just about physical pleasure, and at its best, it is the fruit of deep covenantal love between two people who have committed their lives to one another publicly. It is not something that creates intimacy out of nothing. Instead, it expresses and deepens intimacy that has already been formed through faithfulness, trust, and covenant. And because we are finite, We're pretty limited, actually, as humans. That means that kind of deep bodily and emotional intimacy is not something that can be shared or scattered without it being damaged. It flourishes with exclusivity, because exclusivity in this context is where the trust comes from, and trust is what intimacy depends upon. And so this is why lust is so damaging to our relationships, because it breaks the trust and exclusivity. It splits our heart among many and leaves nothing for your partner. And this has been my experience. When I was living in these patterns of lust, I struggled with intimacy with Victoria. But as that has begun to heal, it has grown and grown and grown. It is beautiful now. The reason why has to be exclusive is because, as we read in Genesis, we're made to become one. You can't be two becomes many. And the splitting of that, it just doesn't work. Anyway, I think Dallas Willard, again, captures something of our modern confusion quite well when he writes that contemporary culture has emptied out intimacy. And so people keep searching for it through sexual experience without the framework of faithfulness that actually makes intimacy possible. In other words, we keep hitting that sex button, hoping it will finally produce connection or eke out, a little bit of intimacy might dribble out. But it can't. It can't, because intimacy is not produced through intensity. It is formed through covenantal faithfulness. And so that means lust that we're living in is not just about breaking an arbitrary rule. It's about trying to experience intimacy without love and without faithfulness and without the trust that makes it real. And so that is the deeper thing that Jesus is inviting us into. Not to repress our desire, but to have our desire healed so that we can actually love people rather than consume them. So where does this all leave us? I mean, if we're honest, we hear this passage that we've heard today, and I feel the weight of it. I imagine others do too. And it's not just because Jesus is speaking so strongly in this moment, but because we recognize ourselves in it. We know what it is like to have desires that feel hard to control. We know what it is like to have thoughts that don't go away easily. And we see it as a pattern in our lives, and we start to believe it defines us. And Jesus doesn't ignore that, but he doesn't leave us there. Jesus, yes, because the goal of Jesus is not just to expose us. He does that. He is doing that. But his goal is to transform us. And so he's not showing us all this brokenness in our life just to leave us in a place of despair. He's showing us how broken we are so that we see how deep the healing needs to go and that he is offering it in his kingdom. And so this is where the heart of the gospel is. That Jesus did not stand at a distance and say, try harder to be pure and then I'll approach. He stepped into our humanity. He steps into our humanity still. And he enters this world of broken desire and failed love and broken trust. And instead of condemning from afar, he lives a perfect life from within it. And so where we grasp, he gives. Where we seek self-satisfaction, he lays down his life for the good of others. And when we take what we want, Jesus says, not my will, but yours be done. And this matters because what it means is change for us is not first about just trying harder. It's about coming to Jesus. Because in the kingdom, transformation does not begin with self-mastery. It begins by being mastered by love. And when we see Jesus clearly, when we begin to approach him, when we set aside our shame and just go, actually, I need to be with you, we step out of the darkness and into the light. And in the moment when we see the light, when all of our horribleness is put in the light, it's a horrible thing to see. But in the light, that is where God can start working on it. It's not instant, it's not perfect, and it goes slower than we would like, but it's genuine. And we begin to see that we are not defined by our worst desires. And slowly over time, as we sit in God's presence, and as we begin to let him work on this, new desires begin to form. So what do we do with this? Well, we return to Jesus, not as people trying to prove ourselves, but as people learning how to be a whole human with him. We ask him to heal this lust that is in us, this disorder that's in us, which I have to say means confession is necessary here. You can't have anything healed in you in terms of lust that is not revealed. It needs to be revealed. We need to ask him to retrain us into how to love, and we need him to teach us how to see people differently. So not as objects to consume, but as people to honor. People made in the image of God, people worth loving. My experience, though, has also told me that you cannot do this journey without others. Accountability is crucial here. And so find a few people who you can trust and invite them to ask the awkward, excruciatingly exposing questions, as well as get them to walk alongside you in it. That is what did it for me. And it requires this accountability rather than just between you and God, because at the heart of lust is a breakdown of relationship between you and others. So it's going to require others to heal that as well. Now, I just have a word of caution. I have found that alongside lust comes a spirit of lies. And it is all too easy to invite someone into your life to journey this, to hold you to account, but you let the shame win and you fake how well you're actually doing. Okay? It's excruciating, but honesty really is the best thing here. And I have found that if you're struggling with that honesty, you can earnestly ask Jesus, help me be honest. And he does. He makes it so it just churns inside you until it has to come out. It's excruciating, but it is worth it. Yeah. Confession is the secret. And if it feels like this is a slow or fragile process, it's because it is. It takes a long time. There'll be lots of mistakes along the way, but that's because Jesus doesn't really rush transformation, but he's faithful in it. And he does not give up on what he begins. So the invitation today is not try harder not to fail. It is come to Jesus. Learn a new way to see, a new way to desire, and a new way to love. Become free in him. Because in the kingdom of God, we're not just told what to avoid. We're told who we are becoming. Whole people, free people, people who can love without consuming, who can desire without destroying, people who are becoming like Jesus. Amen.